Dad's 60th birthday party was being held at the Sterling Club, the kind of place where memberships cost more than most people's annual salaries. My brother Blake had insisted on hosting it there. Nothing but the best for Theodore Hastings, founder and CEO of Hastings Manufacturing. I arrived exactly on time, wearing a simple navy dress that Blake would probably call boring, and Mom would politely suggest I dress up more. But I'd learned years ago that nothing I wore would ever be right in their eyes, so I stopped trying. The ballroom was already full of Dad's business associates, country club friends, and extended family. Blake stood near the bar, holding court with his fraternity brothers and Dad's executive team. He was in his element, loud, confident, already slightly drunk at 6 p.m. Mom spotted me first. "Oh, Vanessa. You came." "Of course I came. It's Dad's birthday." She gave me that familiar tight-lipped smile. "Well, you've been so busy with your little consulting work. We weren't sure you'd make time." My little consulting work was a thriving business analytics firm with 15 employees and seven-figure revenues, but I'd stopped correcting her years ago. "Where should I put this?" I held up the gift I'd brought, a first edition of Dad's favorite business book that I'd tracked down after 3 months of searching. "Oh, just put it on the table with the others." She was already looking past me, waving at someone more important. I set the carefully wrapped book among the pile of expensive golf clubs, designer watches, and premium whiskey bottles. My gift looked modest by comparison, but Dad would understand. At least, the father I'd known growing up would have. I wasn't sure about the man he'd become. "Vanessa." Blake's voice boomed across the room. "Look who decided to show up. Must have been a slow day at the office." His friends laughed. I smiled politely and headed toward the buffet table, helping myself to food while trying to be invisible. It was a skill I'd perfected over the years. Blake followed me because of course he did. You could have at least tried to look festive. This is a celebration." "I'm celebrating," I said calmly. "Quietly." "That's your problem, Ness. Everything's always quiet with you. No ambition, no drive. Dad built an empire and you're content running a little spreadsheet business." I took a bite of salmon and said nothing. Engaging with Blake when he was drinking never ended well. "But hey," he continued, draping an arm around my shoulders in a way that looked affectionate but felt possessive, "at least you'll be taken care of. Family's family, right? Even if you didn't earn it." I stepped away from his arm. "Excuse me." I found a quiet corner and ate my dinner, watching the party unfold. Dad was in his element too, glad-handing and networking even at his own birthday party. Mom floated between groups, playing the perfect hostess. Blake grew louder with each drink. And I stayed in my corner, invisible as always, until Dad stood up to give a speech. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice carrying across the ballroom. 60 years old. Hard to believe. Feels like just yesterday, I was starting Hastings Manufacturing in a rented garage with nothing but a drill press and a dream. Applause. Dad smiled, basking in it. "I've been blessed in business and in life. Great friends, wonderful colleagues, and most importantly, family." He gestured toward Mom, who beamed. Then toward Blake, who stood up straighter. "My son Blake, who's been working alongside me for the past 8 years. Learning the business inside and out." More applause. Blake actually took a small bow. Dad's eyes found me in my corner. "And my daughter Vanessa, who's always been, well, she's here tonight and that means a lot." Polite, scattered applause. I nodded slightly, used to being the afterthought. "I'm not getting any younger," Dad continued. "And I've been thinking a lot about legacy, about succession, about what happens to Hastings Manufacturing when I'm gone." The room went silent. This was what everyone had been waiting for. "I haven't made any final decisions yet," Dad said, and I saw Blake's face fall slightly. "But I want you all to know that the company is in good hands. The next generation of Hastings leadership is ready." He raised his glass. "To family, to business, and to the future." "To the future," everyone echoed. As the party continued, I noticed Blake pulling Dad aside, their heads close together in intense conversation. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but Blake's body language was urgent, almost pleading. Dad patted his shoulder and nodded. Blake's face broke into a huge grin. 20 minutes later, Blake was back with his friends at the bar, and I was close enough to hear their conversation while pretending to examine the dessert table. "It's happening," Blake said, his voice carrying that particular tone of drunk confidence. "Dad's signing the business over to me. Finally." "Seriously?" one of his friends asked. "The whole thing?" 85%, Blake said. "Keeping 15 for himself to advise, but I'll be CEO, majority owner, the whole deal. We're meeting with the lawyers next week to draw up the papers." "What about your sister?" Blake snorted. "What about her? She walked away from the family business years ago to play with spreadsheets. Dad's giving her some token payout, but the company goes to me. As it should. I've earned this. I've put in the work." "She doesn't deserve it anyway," another friend chimed in. "No offense, but she's barely even here half the time." "Exactly," Blake agreed. "Dad built this company for someone who'd appreciate it, who'd carry on the legacy. That's me, not her." They all raised their glasses in congratulations. I watched Blake's face, flushed with alcohol and triumph and certainty that he'd finally won. I picked up a small plate of dessert and went back to my corner. About an hour later, there was a small commotion at the entrance. A distinguished-looking man in his 60s had arrived, scanning the crowd. Dad spotted him and frowned. "Robert? I wasn't expecting you tonight." Robert Morrison, Dad's corporate attorney for 20 years, looked uncomfortable. "Theodore, I apologize for the intrusion, but there's an urgent matter we need to discuss. It can't wait until Monday."
Urgent?
"What kind of urgent?" Robert's eyes found me across the room, then looked back at Dad. "Perhaps somewhere private?" "Anything you need to say can be said here," Blake interjected, walking over. "We're all family and friends." Robert hesitated, then pulled out a folder from his briefcase. "Very well. Theodore, I received a formal notification this afternoon regarding Hastings Manufacturing's corporate structure. Specifically, regarding majority share ownership." "Yes," Dad said impatiently. "What about it?" "According to the documents filed with the State Corporation Commission, you currently own 43% of Hastings Manufacturing." "I know that," Dad said. "I sold some shares years ago for capital, but I'm still the majority shareholder and CEO." "Actually," Robert said carefully, "you're not the majority shareholder." The room had gone completely silent. Everyone was listening now. Blake laughed. "Of course he is. Who else would?" "Your sister," Robert interrupted, looking directly at Blake. "Vanessa holds 81% of voting shares in Hastings Manufacturing. She's held majority control for 7 years." The glass in Blake's hand slipped and shattered on the marble floor. The silence that followed was absolute. "That's impossible," Dad said, his face going pale. "I never sold her." "You didn't," Robert agreed. "Harold Hastings did." "Grandpa," Blake stammered. "Grandpa's been dead for 9 years. 8 years and 7 months, I said quietly, speaking for the first time. "He died 2 weeks after I graduated from business school." All eyes turned to me. Robert nodded. "Harold Hastings owned 51% of the company as founder. When he passed, according to his will and trust documents, those shares were transferred to his granddaughter, Vanessa Marie Hastings." "Why wasn't I told about this?" Dad demanded. "You were told," Robert said gently. "I personally delivered the notification to you 8 years ago. You were not in a good place at the time. Your father's death hit you hard. You said you'd deal with it later and never followed up." I watched Dad's face as memory struggled through denial. His father had died suddenly, a heart attack at 72. Dad had been devastated, barely functional for months. "I don't remember," Dad started. "I have the signed receipt," Robert said, pulling out another document. "And copies of the stock transfer certificates. And the updated corporate bylaws. And the annual proxy votes that Vanessa has been submitting for the past 7 years, all properly documented and filed." Blake turned to me, his face twisted with confusion and rage. "You've owned the company for 7 years? And you never said anything?" "You never asked," I replied calmly. "I've been working there." He stopped, realization dawning.
Wait.
Is this why? Why what? I asked, though I knew exactly where he was going. Why Dad never actually made me a partner? Why the COO position never materialized? Why I'm still listed as Senior Vice President instead of Executive VP like I was promised? Blake, Dad started. Because SHE owns the company, Blake shouted. Because nothing could happen without her approval. This whole time, you've been sabotaging me. I haven't sabotaged anything, I said. I've been protecting the company. Protecting it from what? I set down my dessert plate and walked to the center of the room.
From you, Blake.
From your terrible decisions. From your drinking. From your tendency to treat Dad's employees like servants and Dad's money like your own personal fund. That's not true. Isn't it? I looked at Dad. Should I detail the financial review I've been conducting for the past 7 years? The one that shows approximately $3.2 million in questionable expenses charged to Blake's corporate account. Dad's face went from pale to gray. Vanessa, Mom said sharply, this is not the time or place. Mom, when would be the time? When Blake bankrupts the company. When the IRS comes asking questions about those business trips to Vegas that didn't involve any actual business? How do you know about those? Blake demanded. Because I'm the majority shareholder, I said. I have access to everything. Every expense report. Every financial statement. Every decision Dad makes has to be ratified by the board, and I control the board. Robert was nodding. It's true. Ms. Hastings has been exercising her voting rights through proxy for years. She's approved all major financial decisions, vetoed several questionable initiatives, and maintained oversight of company operations. You've been spying on me, Blake accused. I've been doing my fiduciary duty as majority shareholder, I corrected. There's a difference. Dad finally found his voice. Vanessa, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't we discuss this? We did discuss it, Dad. 8 years ago. You told me to handle it because you couldn't deal with Grandpa's death. So I handled it. By secretly controlling my company? It's not your company, I said gently but firmly. It's Grandpa's company. He founded it. He built it. And he left it to me. Why? Blake demanded. Why you and not Dad? Why you and not me? I pulled my own folder from my purse. I'd been carrying it all night, waiting for this moment. Because Grandpa saw clearly. He loved Dad, but he knew Dad's weaknesses. The need to be liked. The inability to say no. The tendency to choose family loyalty over business sense. I opened the folder and pulled out a letter. This is from Grandpa, written to me 2 weeks before he died. He knew his heart was failing. He knew he needed to make arrangements. Read it, Dad said quietly. I cleared my throat and began. Dear Vanessa, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I hope your father gave you this letter personally, but knowing Theodore, he probably couldn't bring himself to do it. That's okay. It's who he is. I'm leaving you controlling interest in Hastings Manufacturing. Not because I love you more than your father or your brother, but because I trust you more. Theodore is a good man, but he's weak where Blake is concerned. He sees his son through the eyes of hope rather than reality. Blake is charming, confident, and utterly unfit to run this company. You, on the other hand, have something your brother lacks: integrity. You also have what your father lacks: the ability to make hard decisions. I know this will cause family problems. I know Theodore will be hurt. I know Blake will be furious. But sometimes love means protecting people from themselves. The company needs someone who'll put its interests first, who'll protect our employees, who'll maintain the standards I built over 40 years. That's you, Vanessa. It's always been you. I'm sorry to put this burden on you, but I trust you to carry it well. Asterisk love always, Grandpa Harold. The silence in the room was deafening. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the folder. So that's it. Blake's voice was shaking. 8 years of my life, working for a company I thought I'd inherit, and it was all a lie. It wasn't a lie, I said. You do important work at Hastings. You're good at client relations, at sales, at being the public face. But Blake, you're not CEO material.
You know it.
I know it. Grandpa knew it. That's not your decision to make. Actually, it is. I'm the majority shareholder, which means I decide who runs the company. Dad spoke up, his voice heavy. And what have you decided? That Dad stays as CEO, I said. With some conditions. Conditions? I pulled out another document. I had Robert draw these up last month. Dad, you're good at running operations. You know the manufacturing side better than anyone. But the financial oversight needs to change. I handed him the document. Effective immediately, all expenses over $10,000 require board approval. All executive compensation changes require shareholder vote. And Blake's corporate credit card limit is reduced to $5,000 monthly. Blake's face was purple. You can't do this. I can, and I am. You've spent $180,000 this year alone on business expenses that have nothing to do with business. That ends now.
Dad.
Blake turned to our father desperately. Are you going to let her do this? Dad was reading the document, his hands shaking slightly. These terms are reasonable. Very reasonable, actually. More generous than I'd be if our positions were reversed.
What?
Blake looked betrayed. Son, she's right. About the expenses. About the oversight. I've been letting things slide because... He trailed off, looking at me with something like shame. Because you're my son, and I wanted to believe the best. So that's it. Blake looked around wildly at the assembled guests, most of whom were staring at their drinks, at the floor, anywhere but at the family drama unfolding. Everyone's just going to let her waltz in here and take over? I'm not taking over, I said patiently. I've been the majority owner for 7 years. I'm just done being invisible while you run the company into the ground. Blake grabbed his jacket. I'm done. I quit. You can run your precious company yourself. Blake, wait. Dad started. But Blake was already storming out, his friends trailing awkwardly behind him. The party, unsurprisingly, ended shortly after that. Dad called an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. I drove down from my home office Sunday night, checking into a hotel near Hastings Manufacturing Headquarters. I hadn't been to the facility in 3 years. I'd done all my shareholder duties remotely, reviewing documents, attending board meetings via video conference, exercising my proxy votes. But I'd never set foot on the property since Grandpa's funeral. Walking through those doors felt surreal. The receptionist didn't recognize me. Can I help you? Vanessa Hastings. I'm here for the board meeting. Her eyes widened. Oh, Ms. Hastings. I'm so sorry, I didn't realize. Please go right up. Conference room A. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The executive suite looked exactly as I remembered. Same dark wood paneling, same corporate photography, same slightly musty smell of old carpet. The conference room was full. Dad sat at the head of the table, looking like he'd aged a decade over the weekend. The 5 board members, all old friends of Grandpa's who'd served for years, sat in awkward silence. Vanessa, Dad said quietly. Thank you for coming. Of course. I took the seat at the opposite end of the table, the seat Grandpa used to occupy. Shall we begin? Asked Martin Chen, the board's senior member. Dad cleared his throat. As you're all aware, some information came to light this weekend regarding the company's ownership structure. Information I should have been clearer about years ago.
He looked at me.
Vanessa, would you like to address the board? I stood, pulling out my laptop. I've prepared a presentation. If I may. For the next hour, I walked them through everything. The share transfer. 7 years of proxy votes. Financial analyses. Blake's expense reports. Concerning patterns in company spending. Areas of inefficiency. Opportunities for growth. I'd been doing this work for years, but always remotely, always quietly. Now I laid it all out in detail. When I finished, Martin spoke first. This is thorough. Very thorough. I take my responsibilities seriously, I said. Clearly. Theodore, were you aware of all this?
Dad shook his head.
Not the details. Not the extent. I knew Vanessa voted by proxy, but I didn't realize she was conducting this level of oversight. Because you never asked, I said gently. And I didn't force the issue.
But things have changed.
Blake's spending is unsustainable. The company needs restructuring. And I can't do this remotely anymore. What are you proposing? Asked Janet Wu, the CFO. That I take a more active role.
Not as CEO. Dad's good at that.
But as chair of the board. Active oversight. Weekly meetings. Direct involvement in major decisions. I looked at Dad. I'm not trying to push you out, but I can't be a passive shareholder anymore. Dad nodded slowly. I understand.
And you're right. About all of it.
I've been negligent. In many ways. The board voted unanimously to approve my proposal. I was officially chair of the board of Hastings Manufacturing. After the meeting, Dad asked me to stay. I owe you an apology, he said once we were alone. Many apologies, actually.
Dad.
Let me finish. I've been a terrible father to you, Vanessa. Not intentionally, but that doesn't make it better. I always favored Blake. Always saw him as my successor. Always dismissed your accomplishments because they weren't what I wanted you to accomplish. He sat down heavily. Your grandfather saw what I couldn't, or wouldn't. That Blake is charming but irresponsible. That you have the integrity and intelligence this company needs. That I was too weak to admit it. You're not weak, Dad. I am. Especially where Blake is concerned. I wanted so badly for him to be ready.
To be worthy.
I overlooked everything that proved otherwise. What are you going to do about Blake?
I asked.
Dad sighed. I don't know.
He's not speaking to me.
Your mother is furious with both of us. The family's fractured. The family's been fractured for years, I said quietly. We're just finally being honest about it. Blake showed up at my hotel that night, drunk and angry. You destroyed everything, he slurred when I opened the door. 8 years of my life. My future. My relationship with Dad. All of it. Blake, you're drunk. Go home.
Home.
He laughed bitterly. To what? To Mom crying? To Dad not looking at me? To knowing that my little sister has been pulling the strings this whole time? I wasn't pulling strings. I was protecting the company. From me. You were protecting it from me. He pushed into the room, and I let him, because fighting a drunk Blake never worked. You think you're so much better than me. So much smarter. So much more worthy. I don't think that. Yes, you do, he shouted. You and Grandpa both. You both decided I wasn't good enough. Wasn't smart enough. Wasn't worthy of the family business. Blake, sit down. Please. He collapsed into a chair, his anger dissolving into something that looked like grief. I tried so hard. For 8 years, I worked my ass off. And it didn't matter. Because you owned it all along. You didn't work that hard, I said gently but honestly. You came in late, left early, took long lunches, charged personal expenses to the company. I have the records, Blake. All of them. Because it didn't matter. He looked up at me with red eyes. Why work hard when the outcome was predetermined? When my baby sister already owned everything? You didn't know I owned it. You worked that way because that's who you are. The truth of that hung in the air between us. What happens now? He asked finally. That depends on you. On me. I sat down across from him. You're still senior VP. You still have a job. You're still good at client relations. If you can get your spending under control, if you can show up consistently, if you can actually do the work you're being paid for, then you keep that position. Under your supervision. Under appropriate oversight, yes. That's how businesses work, Blake. Especially when you've proven you can't be trusted with unlimited funds. He was quiet for a long moment. And if I can't do that? If I can't work for my little sister? Then you resign, and we part ways professionally. You'd still be family, but you wouldn't be at Hastings. Some choice. It's more of a choice than you've given Dad for 8 years, I pointed out. You've been running up expenses, making promises to clients without board approval, treating the company like your personal playground. At least I'm giving you an option to fix it. He stood up, swaying slightly. I need to think. Take your time. But Blake. He paused at the door. Get help. For the drinking. Please. He left without responding. Blake did get help. Not immediately. It took another month of spiraling before he finally checked himself into a treatment program. 60 days inpatient, followed by intensive outpatient therapy. When he came back to work, he was different. Quieter. More focused. Actually present in meetings instead of just physically there. I'd restructured his role while he was gone. Smaller client portfolio. Direct supervision from Janet. Strict expense limits. He accepted it without argument. "I'm not happy about this," he told me in our first one-on-one meeting after his return. "But I'm trying to understand it. That's all I ask." I talked a lot about family in therapy, about being the golden child, about how that messed me up in ways I didn't realize. And I'm starting to see how I treated you. How we all treated you. Like, you didn't matter because you weren't who we wanted you to be. Blake. No, let me say this. I'm sorry. For all of it. For the dismissal, the mockery, the assumptions. For taking credit for work you were doing behind the scenes. For never once asking if you wanted to be involved. It was the first real apology I'd ever gotten from him. "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot." "I don't know if we can have a real relationship," he continued. "Brother-sister, not just boss-employee. But I'd like to try. If you're willing." "I'm willing," I said. "But Blake, it has to be real. Not just you wanting back into my good graces for business reasons." "I know. I'm in therapy twice a week. Working on it. All of it. We weren't close. Probably never would be. But it was something. With active oversight, Hastings Manufacturing transformed. I brought in consultants to streamline operations. Updated technology systems. Improved employee benefits. Cut wasteful spending while investing in growth areas. In 6 months, profits were up 18%. Employee satisfaction scores rose. We landed 3 major contracts that had been stalled for years. Dad and I developed a working rhythm. He handled day-to-day operations. I handled strategic planning and financial oversight. We met twice weekly to coordinate. "Your grandfather would be proud," he told me one day. "Of the company?
Of you.
Of how you've handled all this. I'm proud too, even though I haven't shown it well. You're showing it now. That matters." Mom was slower to come around. She still blamed me for ruining Blake's life and embarrassing the family. But eventually, even she had to admit the company was thriving. "I still don't understand why your grandfather did this," she said over lunch one day. "Why he cut out his own son. He didn't cut out Dad. Dad still has shares, still has salary, still runs the company. But you have control. Because Grandpa trusted me to use it well. And I have."
She sighed.
"I suppose you have. But it's changed everything." "Everything was already changed, Mom. We were just pretending otherwise." I stood in the conference room where, a year ago, Robert Morrison had shattered Blake's glass and my family's illusions. The board was assembled for our annual shareholder meeting. But this year, there was a new face, a young woman in her 20s, looking nervous. "Everyone," I said, "I'd like to introduce Taylor Morrison. She's joining our board as an advisor." Taylor just completed her MBA and has some innovative ideas about sustainable manufacturing. Taylor was Robert's granddaughter, brilliant and passionate about environmental business practices. She reminded me of myself at that age, full of ideas, desperate to prove herself, underestimated by everyone around her. I'd mentored her for 6 months. Now I was bringing her into the family business. "Vanessa," Dad said after the meeting, "was that necessary? She's very young." "So, was I when Grandpa left me 81% of the company," I pointed out. "Age isn't the issue. Vision is." He nodded slowly. "You're building your own legacy." "I'm building Grandpa's legacy. The one he entrusted to me." That evening, I visited Grandpa's grave. I'd been coming monthly since that birthday party, updating him on the company, on the family, on everything he'd set in motion. "It's been a year, Grandpa," I said, arranging fresh flowers. "A year since everything came out. Since Blake learned the truth. Since Dad realized what you'd done." The cemetery was quiet, just birds and wind. The company's doing well. Really well. Blake's in recovery. Dad and I have a better relationship than we've had in years. Mom's mom. But she's trying. I sat on the bench near his headstone. I understand now why you did it. Why you gave me this burden. It wasn't just about protecting the company. It was about protecting me, giving me proof that I mattered, that I was worthy, that your faith in me was real and documented and legally binding. Tears came, but they were gentle, healing tears. You saw me when no one else did. You believed in me when my own parents couldn't. You gave me not just a company but validation. Purpose. The knowledge that I wasn't crazy for feeling dismissed and undervalued. I was being dismissed and undervalued. I wiped my eyes and smiled.
Thank you, Grandpa. For the company, yes.
But more importantly, for seeing me, really seeing me, and for trusting me with your life's work. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees. It felt like an answer. I stayed until sunset, then drove back to the office. There was work to do. There was always work to do. But now it was work I chose. Work I controlled. Work that validated everything I'd always known I was capable of. Grandpa had given me that gift, and I would honor it every single day.